Hello, friends. Hello, audience. Those who are loyal and those who are haters. You're all welcome to observe today. Today, I'm going to mess up your knowledge of races and history and anthropology. You're going to turn up those books. They mention very little, and I'm going to give you some headlines here. I'm not going to dive deep into details or expressions or explanations of what's going on, but those headlines are enough to really make you reconsider things. Don't ask me how I know. How do I know all that? Well, I just know, right? Um, but then again, let's call it imaginations and romance and historian and anthropologist wannabe. That's me. All right, I'm going to begin with this. Uh, that what we know about humanity, the course of humanity's development and evolution is really very little. In fact, extremely little, and uh, uh, and doesn't tell us what's going on. In fact, if you know the truth about humanity, you will be stunned to how things developed and so on. The first fact is the first composite race or species in human history is that race or species that was developed in Arabia. A little bit south, maybe. Not Yemen, today's Yemen. Yeah, Yemen was included, but the entire southern half of Arabia and even to the north a little bit. That was the first ever composite race made out of different species in the history of humanity. Uh, so humanity spread out, right? And then there was a long isolation of 4 species or races with one floater. Floater means here and there and so on. And eventually, they came back into Arabia, and well, not all of them, right? And they got like entangled pretty bad, and that recipe proved to be pretty pretty bad. Okay. So that's it. I will provide you the proof about that very shortly at the end of this video, or if I have to make 2 videos, then I will provide that later. So let's go back. When the Ice Age was about, there was not all Ice Age. So if you have a desert today, anywhere, right, that was green. The Ice Age didn't really affect it. Why? Because the Ice Age is something to do with the sun as well as the core of the earth. So if it's a desert today, such as Arabia, such as Gobi Desert, such as, here and there, but these 2 are mainly the ones, right? North Africa was not a desert during the Ice Age. And that was, Arabia was lush and green and so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to go back now and then talk about North Europe. I'm not going to say Northwestern Europe, but rather than North Europe, Northern Europe. So, Northern Europe, there was a species, right, or a race, if you want to call it a race. Now, why do I call it a species? Is because really, we were isolated for a long, long time, and then we kind of split, similar to, say, the difference between chimpanzee and orangutan. I know of an orangutan here used to be in Washington, and the chimpanzee too, right? But we weren't that far out. So when we in our progress, when we met, right, and then intermarried, there was an offspring, right? A new offspring. So you call it race, possible, but species, because there's really difference, a little bit of that much difference in the genetics, right? So now in North Europe, there were those very white people. White, I don't mean albinos, right? And okay, back again. When you see a certain person, if you take their pictures and split it in the middle, right, and then mirror one half and make it one picture, and mirror the other half and make it one picture, if they're symmetric, right, if they're very similar, that's one race. But I doubt it. I myself have that. You know, if you do that, they look different. And one half, right, one half is weaker than the other. The other is strong muscle and everything else and immunity and so I know I am an amalgamation of two species, right? Perhaps three, right? So although you know the line is Arab, so the Arabs are a composite or an amalgam. Okay, I don't want to say the word Arabs, right? Those dwellers of Arabia back then, right? Because okay, so now those northern folks at there was a more advanced culture than everybody else. And I'm not talking during the time of Babylon or the pyramids. Oh, no, no, this is before that. This is actually before the Ice Age. Or during the Ice Age, or, you know, somehow there was like not a consistent Ice Age. There was on and off, on and off. The Earth has passed through some tumultuous weather uh, in the past, right? And I'm not talking a few thousand years. Those who tell you the history is 6,000 years, they're like the type that goes to, they're like fairy creature who goes to Warthog school. Remember Warthog, that Harry Potter? Oops, I mean Cambridge. I mean Cambridge. You know, Cambridge is really what Warthog is. I believe. Ask her. So that was the more advanced culture. These people were pretty giants. I mean, when they shook their swords, right, freely, I couldn't carry that sword myself. I'm 6 feet and I used to be strong and so on. Probably still is. I couldn't carry that, right? I mean, I would carry it, right? But let alone fight with it, right? So these people were, like I said, very large, very, you know, very sociable and so on. And that culture in Northern Europe, mainly toward the northwest, but no, they were spread all the way past Moscow, right? In today's term, Moscow, right? They were that far, right? Uh, but the core of it was in northwestern Europe, really, in today's term, northwestern Europe. So they had an advanced culture, not like now, no, no, no. And they had certain ad hoc religions, right, which were quasi, you know, conventions and traditions and social conventions and so on. But number one, they didn't have writing. Writing was not there back then. Uh, but they have like a structure. They have kings, right, and they have and believe it or not, while they had kings and social structures, the other three races and the one that floater didn't have that. They didn't have that structure, right? And they were more advanced than everybody else. Now they say, this guy is like, well, okay, it's my imaginations, and do I like who I like more, most than everybody else? I really like the Arabs, right? Okay, not today's Arabs. Today's Arabs are not what I'm talking about, right? So now these people used to have certain traditions, used to have certain spiritual values, and right, and then they are the ones to build first stone structures in the world, in the human history, really. And these were, one of them is really that Stonehenge, and they have others. Now, not all their buildings were of stone, right? Some of it were mud, some of it were wood, some of it, you know, all kind of stuff, right? And those Stonehenge and so on, they used to come around, and it was their center of worship and center of exchange of ideas, exchange of knowledge, and exchange of spiritual connection. You know, they connect, reconnect, right? And at the same time, they used to light up fires. And I think, if I recall correctly, they did that twice a year. Twice a year, maybe more. You know, like I don't know. Well, I do know they did that, but twice or more, it's just I'm drawing blank on that. So they lit up fires, and then they came and they camped around those structures, right? Now, they had that concept, which is really similar to a mosque today. So a mosque in Indonesia, or a mosque in China, or in Russia, or in the United States, or in Africa, or anywhere else, is really the place of worship, but it's connected to that one in Mecca, right? So the main mosque is really in Mecca. Everywhere else we turn toward it and pray toward Mecca, and so it was like a distributed system, similar to a center, and then that has like tentacles, right? And that's what they've done actually in there. To them, that was the connection, you know. So they didn't have a structure. Their spirits were not as defined as today's, like for example, Islam, right? Has very well defined theology and belief and namus, or what today is called matrix, and it's extremely complex and sophisticated, right? And language and so on. No, they didn't have that, but they knew there was a spirit, right? And they received like they knew there was a spirit, and they knew that they were connected to it. That's why when they talk about the beginning, going back to the beginning, is that when they were, say, in France or in England or elsewhere in today's term, they connected back into, I believe, back then was uh, what's today's Scandinavia, but then that was not well defined. You know, it was also parts of Germany. So Germany and Scandinavia, the large part of Germany, today's German and Baltics and so on, and then Scandinavia, that was their backwater, right? And they were, like I said, sophisticated in culture. They didn't try. Their religion was based on certain tradition, was based on and based on shamans. They have shamans, and they even had other things as well. So when they came onto those, sometimes they had gatherings and festivals. And you know what? The Arabs had something like this as well in the past. They had something that what they called is market. They would travel with a market and they exchange their knowledge and their poetry, and but the Arabs used to write, right? So there is similarity between the two. Hold on, I'll explain that. So when they came, they also exchanged their made an exchange of their unmarried females. What I'm saying here does not say like here's yours, you know, here's a female, I'm gonna give it to you, and you're gonna give me this one. No, no, it didn't happen like that. How you try to you know, when you read things and the stereotyping of Scandinavia and northwestern Germany now tells you that these were very lax on their manhood and morale. No, no, that's not the case. Women at that time had big deal. They had clans, had a big part in arranging those. So when they came and met around those structures, you know, they talked. Women were like the main decision maker behind the scene, right? And this was inherited by other cultures. Well, there was no cultures, but eventually, right, it carried on. You probably catch my drift now where I'm going with that composite race. So now they here came, you know, and women made a decision if the woman, you know, liked the other party and so on, because they were aware of this inbreeding thing, right? They didn't like it. So, and they were well connected. They knew they were one thing, and they knew that the world was wild, you know, and it was problematic. And to them, the Earth, well, had no limit. You know, we really never thought of it as 42,000 kilometers and so on. To them was like the world means like big thing. And they, you know, like they prayed, you know, like for their leaders and for connection to the beginning. And so you can imagine all you want about the culture and structure of their culture. It was not so advanced and sophisticated, but it was there. And that was the first one the world ever knew, really. Uh, there was before that, now before that, like I said, 4 species or races and 1 floater, right? Ways before that, there was actually, all these were one nation. And again, that was in Arabia, but there's no longer a relationship between all those 4, right? And they had some kind of a society, but it was more of a primitive society. Don't think of cavemen or cave women. There was no such thing, right? Wherever human was, human had something better than that, right? But I'll give you an example. So now when they came, you know, and they talked and felt at home, you know, touched base and exchanged, you know, like sometimes the woman doesn't want to marry, so they brought her back along. You know, they had like this sophisticated family, this sophisticated clan, and a larger clan in all these parts, right, of Germania, of Scandinavia, of England, you know, like the UK Isles and the Baltics, and even in today's terms, Russia, right? So now they had that. They had rules. They had prayers, and they had all that. Now they accuse them of being lax, like I said, on ethics and so on. That's not true. Like for example, I watched the other day that series, The Vikings, and then it shows you how Ragnar and his wife invited that grim dad, supposedly trying to make himself God, into their bedroom to sleep with them or something. Can't be farther from the truth, folks. A Scandinavian man or one of the, I don't know, like the word was actually scanned, right? And then from them there was like uh, Germanics and so on, right? But the main really thing was scanned. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna give you something shocker in a little bit. Give me a second. Uh, so that's not true. If you show up in their like bedroom like that or something like that, as that series implied, or tried to stereotype them or accuse them of, oh, they would get that big sword and chop your head off, right? Because they although they had primitive religion and so on, they still the clan was the man of the clan and the chief of the clan and the leader and so on. And they weren't exactly a democracy, nor were they dictatorship, right? But everybody knew what to do, and the exchange, allowed them to keep their relationship with their surroundings and their prayers and their gathering in those smaller structures, which some of them pointed towards Scandinavia, some of them did not, right? And they knew a little bit about seasons, right? Well, they knew the seasons, but they didn't have exactly one big year because of the absence of normal weather and sun activities or appearances and disappearances and so on in the past during that ice age. So that said, you can imagine that. Now I'm going to bring a shocker to you. Back then, the world knew of a certain king, which was mentioned in the Quran, as a matter of fact. The guy who wears a helmet with two horns, right? Now, when you say horns among the Arabs, don't say that. It's a bad thing, when they say he has horns, that means he doesn't mind, like loose ethics in his family or shit like that. No, don't say that. But then that's what they used to wear. And then his name was, repeat after me, his name was, okay. When we say the word Alexander in Arabic, the word Alexander is an Arabic word. How do I know? We know from the olden days, right? The Iskandar. Al is the THE, the, right? Or say in German, D or D, right? So the actual name is Iskandar, not the Alexander, not Al-Iskandar. But the Arabs add certain things to names because names among the Arabs have certain meaning, right? There's no such name that is not known where it's from, unless it's imported, like from so and so, right? But if you search in the Arab literature and liturgy and dictionaries and so on, the first one to put history and dictionary in terms of records, right? You will find their meanings, but the word was Iskandar, not Iskandar, not Alexander, but Iskandar. Now repeat after me. Iskandar, Skandar. That King Alexander was actually a king from that Scandinavia and Germania. Now you're scratching your head. Well, look, this guy is so and so because Alexander is really Macedonian. Yes, there was copycats, not copycats, rather than admirers. This is similar to saying, like for example, Wojtyla of the Vatican named himself John Paul the 18th or something of the sort. That was a very well-known king, right? He was like a massive leader, massive character, and so on and so forth. And he led, right? He was like over all this near Germania and Scandinavia, and we're talking all the way past, like way over 10,000 years ago. And you may say humans are not capable of keeping track that long. Humans are capable of keeping track of their ancestry and their traditions for over 1,000,000 years. But we haven't been here for 1,000,000 years. Let's put it this way. So his name was Iskandar. The first Iskandar is really a king from that land. And then later on, they followed suit, like the Macedonian uh, the Macedonian king, and there were other Alexanders as well. He was not the only Alexander in there. So Alexander, to name yourself Alexander, is really now us, like in the world, naming ourselves Muhammad or Abu Bakr or Omar, right, or Muhammad, right? Because you're naming yourself after such a great character, massive character who loved humanity, and he brought us the word of God, and God sent us his word through him, and he led us, and he generated this new world. All right, so now I'm going to tell you something about uh, those four races and one floater. So the Arabs weren't there, right? But Arabia had a race in it. That race, guess what? It still exists. It's Aborigines. Southern Arabia had Aborigines in it. Those Aborigines are exactly like those in Australia, right? And the evidence I'm going to provide you is that that old Arab race is now being generated again. Well, almost, not exactly the same thing, right? White people from Europe mixing with Aborigines of Australia, you get Arabs, right? So to speak, right? But close enough. The older people, long hair and so on, were much larger and were more defined Europeans. Like their blue eyes and their sizes and their and you know what I'm talking about. But that's what it is, right? So the Arabs. So now, when the Ice Age came, a lot of huge migration started down south from that area, right? Not all together, they just got up and left, but the weather began to really be problematic, right? And they were getting sick, and lifespan is short, and so they started, getting up in clans, and there was like immediately it started started slow, but then it began to grow, and lo and behold, so many of those Scans and Germanics and so on, Skandar, like Skandar was gone back then, right? Their history is very long, and they moved down into Arabia. So now, when they moved into Arabia, that floating race also moved along, right? That floating race, I'll explain it a little bit later, moved from here to there, and they had different characteristics than the other four species, right? So when they moved to Arabia, along with that floater, they mixed with the Aborigines of Australia. As a matter of fact, I know some Bedouins in Syria who look so like Aborigines, who look so like talk like some of the actresses now. One of them is like distant relative, right? You look at them and the eyes, and the hair. Even Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his hair, as described, look like those of Aborigines, right? It's long and wave and heavy, right? It's not curly. Uh, so now, when they stayed there, like they said, they got mixed up, the greatest mixed up. So now we have a new race or a new species or composite or mix up of two races, those North Europeans, as well as the Aborigines of Arabia. So Arabia uh, had that mix, and now it turned out to be, he knows, right? Turned out to be such a recipe, right? Oh boy. Oh boy. Now, to make a long story short, you guys probably can track that down. Eventually, the migration from the north stopped, but there was still some left in there. They were able to adapt to the atmosphere, and they were dependent on sea, like fish and seal, and fishing. Like their food was mainly from the sea. That's why they never go short on like minerals and vitamins, but agriculture was basically almost non-existent, right? And they got on some, somehow, somewhere, but they stayed and they survived until the weather actually started to, that hardship or harsh weather started to dissipate, right? Now, here, when that race was born, right, that new species or interspecies creation was born in Arabia. From Arabia all the way to around Moscow now, this is the highway of migration. Now, some of them moved either by way of the sea or above by way of modern day Iran into India, right? And India, southern India, or India, southern India, had aborigines as well. So now the Indians are what's called second stage Arabs. So the first migration came from Europe into Arabia, right? And the whites mixed with the aborigines, you get the Arabs, right? And then that mix began to leave out up north, right? Many of them went down like into India, so they further mixed with aborigines of India, who's still there sometimes. You go there in the south, the color and the hair, and they're not really black. They're kind of beet color, right? They're like the beet that you eat, it's something like that. And that's what India people are. They are second stage Arabs from a mix of aborigines, original aborigines, and Europeans. Not just that, the migrations began to go back and forth. Now, many of those guys went and moved into North Africa, right? North Africa, these guys are the original races, right? And they're pretty old in there. We're talking some maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe older, probably. So they moved into North Africa, right? And some of them actually moved back into northwestern Europe and further mixed with the original race that made them. And they knew, those people, the new race in Arabia, they always knew, father to son and so on and so forth, that they had their ancestor come from the north, right? And then now the people in India started, like looking like Arabs, like that new race, but a little bit darker. And some of these migrations stayed in today's term, Persia and right? Now in North Africa, there was further mix, some of those white people, or that race, which has been there around like many thousand years, right? With their structural buildings and stone and so on. They started moving southward, right? Not many. That's why the Tuareg had some of that blood, as a matter of fact, although they're very close and similar to that race that was born in Arabia, the Tuareg and the Amazigh or Berbers and so on. They're from Arabia, right? So now they started. There's this highway, right, between today's Moscow and South Arabia, right, back and forth, right and left, right and left. Now, there are two other races. So now we have two species. We have the Aborigines and we have the North Europeans, right? And then we had the Mongoloids. The Mongoloids is really in around Gobi, the desert, right? So that's race number 3. And then there is the African Southwest African. That was isolated from Arabia, right? So now the Mongoloids, remember, wherever there is a desert, it was green in the past. So they survived there, right? So those Mongoloids further mixed with that race from the north, and they produced what's today Chinese, and so on and so forth. And then the Southeast Asian as well is really not Aborigines. It's a migration from those people, and then from Arabia as well. So you got like now the mix of that race between those whites and the Mongoloids in Mongolia got mixed up, right? They moved south and east. They occupied the East Asia, East and Southeast Asia. But then those from Arabia as well made their way through, and from India too. And they got mixed up, right? Now later, at much later stage, that's like before Islam, but when Arabia was really, I would say, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 years ago, Arabs, that race of Arabs which remained after so many migrations, right? After the thaw, that race which was a mix between the Aborigines and the North Europeans, right, began to immigrate back out, right? So they occupied all these places, right? All these places, and then the Arabs began to spread into Africa, East Africa. So now, when you look at today's Arabia, it's a lot of mix after Islam. But before Islam, it was not much different from the Nile and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, right? So Niger, Mali, and so on. But Ghana and down all the way to South Africa was a different race altogether. But there was a mix, right? There was a mix as well. So those people in East Africa, east of the Nile, all the way down to Somalia and so on, including Ethiopia, these guys are the same race as those of that mix that was the first composite mix of Arabia, right? So that's that. What else I was going to talk about? Let me take a break. Okay, so whatever you do, don't ever, don't ever think we were developed like that. Was there Adam and Eve? Yes, there was Adam and Eve. Uh, you may say, oh, wait a minute, it's been too long. And if you count the bones and their structure between, say, an animal and a human, you would find them the same, right? You know, there's like shoulders, there's hands. This is like an engineer designing two different buildings and using same material, but time and again. In Islam, and you will be ill-advised not to really realize what the Quran is, right? This is, we call something like the unity of the maker and the unity of making. So if there is much creation out in space, in the universe, right? And then if you go, say, you find like organic uh, 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 creatures in there, right? So in Jupiter, they will be different. Why? Because there is like far greater gravity, far stronger gravity, and probably they have to breathe different oxygen. And well, you find that here, right? Like creatures in the sea, they have gills, right? We have nose and lungs, but don't ever discount the creation story. Okay, now I'm going to go to the floater race. The floater race is really what is called the Neanderthal. So the Neanderthal weren't really fixed. They had different characteristics. And they were very compatible with humans, like a species, right? Like I said, you can call them race, but they're a species of humanity, which is compatible. You can get married and so on, with them, and they will produce. They were very intelligent. They were very genius, right? And they talk pretty sophisticated language, and not as sophisticated as Arabic, right? But like us humans, right? And they knew each other, and you would go, like when you went to the market, you would see them there, right? But they were here and there. They weren't like in one place, but mainly in North Europe. However, they existed around other areas, and I sometimes suspect, I don't know this for certain, I sometimes suspect that the Neanderthal really were original also to Arabia, not just the Aborigines. So now those guys their brain is designed as to be very, very smart, right? So they're very smart. So you can talk to them, you can talk to a gorilla all you want, right? You're not going to go anywhere, right? But they're as conscious as we are, and they're communicative and so on. But they had their emotional base was very thin. What do I mean by that? Our emotions is very strong. It's why we make coherent society, and family and clan and so on. They didn't have that. They had some of that, but not really big deal. So when they split, so if you got like people here who are a group of Neanderthal, right, and they're smart and they built but when they split, they really didn't miss their relatives. That's it, right? This is similar to today's gypsies, right? Or perhaps the Jews. Don't consider this an insult. When the gypsies, I know for certain, they could be relatives like uncles and children and so on sitting in one place. And suddenly part of them just gets up and move elsewhere, right? Because they don't have like homes or anything else. And that's it. They don't care if they don't see each other again. The reason for the gypsies is not like that for the Neanderthal. The gypsies, it's because they don't have a defined religion like we do. They don't have anything of the sort. I really don't know why they do that, but it does appear like they don't care. Is it physiological function? Maybe, I don't know. but the Neanderthals were more like cats. You know how cats, they're very intelligent. In fact, some of their intelligence is higher than us in certain aspects, right? But then that's it, right? You know, once a kitten is grown old enough, that's it. It's left on its own. They don't miss it, and that's it, right? Uh, that's that kind of emotions which allowed them to be very intelligent and capable of learning and possibly produce some knowledge, right? Uh, but uh, but their emotions were very thin, and that made them lose a lot on society. Similar to say killer whales, they're very intelligent, right? But since they have no emotions, things learning and intelligence doesn't grow much into them, right? Emotions are related to intelligence. That's why they say emotional intelligence, meaningly intelligence is born by emotions, right? If there are emotions, there are intelligence. If there's not, there is not, right? So these guys are mixed, and I think some, maybe some of them are in me or probably in you or anything else. So they floated. Well, that's my theory. 40 minutes of anthropology, but these are facts. And if you want to go look at those Aborigines in Australia mixing with whites, the offspring is really Arabs, right there and then. Not like back then, because today's whites are also a mix of today's Europeans are mix of that original composite from Arabia as well. So that Arabia was really the thing, right? Now you may say, okay, speaking of stones, the first stone ever building and so on was actually in North Europe, and then that race that was born in Arabia acquired that, and they started building stuff in Yemen and some of it in South Arabia, some of it here and there. Uh, but then when they moved, like the Hyksos moved from Arabia into Egypt and into Mesopotamia and that back then and so on, they started building because they inherited that from their ancestors in the north, right? So it wasn't completely. So the new mix really produced those people, and they started writing, and they started things, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So that original that composite or amalgamation of races or species in Arabia was smarter than everybody else. You know, intelligence is different from one person to another. When you say smarter, you're not saying the other one is dumb, right? But it's their focus and their ability to maintain, knowledge and grow it and so on and so forth was very obvious in them. And that's why you see pyramids, that's why. And there is a religious side to it, right? You know, their personality, the one that evolved or was produced by the amalgamation of those races was different. You know, they were like, some of them were aggressive, some of them, things of the sort, right? They were just different. Those people who were a mix of Aborigines and North Europeans in Arabia, they are different, but they're everywhere else now. Now they went back to Europe, they're in Africa, they went to India, they went to today's China, and slowly but surely, right? So they were very intelligent and they were builders and so on. Until a cataclysm happens. A cataclysm that never happened before or after in the human history, and that's the birth of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, right? And his family. And we have the New World because of he had inherited from that amalgamation. Yes, that's what it is. Here we go. Some tea. So you can despise or those great Arabs all you want, but they're in you, and you're in that original race. Now today's Arabia is not exactly the old race, right? Or that resultant great mix up, right? Because after Islam there was a huge migration outside of Arabia into Spain, into France, into Italy, into Asia, Altai. You know, Altai is an Arabic tribe, right? Altai, right? Into England, into Wales, into Germania, and so on and so on. So that base spread again, and then but there was a reverse migration, religious migration. So you got people from India, you got people from what's termed as Persia or India or Southeast Asia or Africa. They immigrated back into the peninsula, right? So today's Arabs in the peninsula are not exactly that old race. They're just a mix, right? Some of them, some of the Bedouins are in fact those old Arabs, but not as much, right? You'd find them even in Syria and in Turkey, today's day Turkey. You know, the Turks, some Turks, you know, talk bad about the Arabs. What was Turkey before the Turks came to it? It was a mix of Romans and who actually was a migration from that original race, right? And those Arabs, right? Right. So is Persia, right? You know, and so on and so forth. So that's where we were born. It was in Africa. Uh, Now, before those four species and one floater species, there was a long time, right? But that's not something I'm going to talk about. And there was a lot of isolation, you know, long time isolation between that around Gobi Desert and then Arabia in North and then West Africa. Uh, that's a lot of gibberish for today. But guess what? You know, guess what? That race, that's all we are. That species that resulted in Arabia, that's us. That's who we are. That's the brain that we have now, and we all have that Neanderthal thing. Again, I think if it existed, I do believe it existed in large number or small number. I can't say, right? In Europe, but perhaps in Arabia as well. It's kind of fluid. They moved around if they dare. Maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know. Here's an unfortunate thing. The word Roma, you know how they call the gypsies Roma? They think they're from Romania. That's not true. The name Roma is from Arabic. Rumma. Rumma. When they got up and left in the 6th century, just about the appearance of Islam afterwards, and spread out in the world, right? Mainly into the Middle East because it was prosperous and so on. They had like a lot of poverty, and they didn't have religion, and they were a little bit lax on, you know, ethics and so on and so forth. So the Arabs called them Rumma. Rumma means like, you know, it's like a very bad term, derogatory term. Rumma, R-M-M-T, it's closed T. Rumma. The M is tense. You can check it out. It means that if there is like, for example, a rope, right? And then its end is loose, you know, you get like spread out those threads and so on. That is called rumma, or, you know, something bad, right? So unfortunately, that's what Roma is. That's what it is. But they're not from Romania. But they all, we all are from that composite race or further mix down the line, right? So the original that composite race is Aborigines, Europeans, and most likely that Neanderthals is where we get our, say, mathematical abilities and other things like, you know, like grammars and of the sort and so on. But the cataclysmic event really in our story is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Okay, that's enough gibberish, and I think that should do it. I'm not going to make another video, but from what I said is I just drew a rough map here, right? But these are facts. Oh, I'm sorry, these are imaginations, and I don't know how I know. And I never been to Slytherin, that like, oh, Warthog or Cambridge. I never been there, so I don't know. Have a nice day, my friends. What we know sometimes, you just have to fine tune, and you will know. You can hear, right? Have a nice day, my friends, and good night.